Welcome to Writing Matters. My name is Bailey Sanford.
My name is Nevaeh Tigert.
And joining us today is Dr. Gabriela Vlahovici-Jones, Composition Coordinator in the Department of English Language and Media Studies.
We are excited to open a series of discussion on the history of writing and writing instruction.
Dr. Vlahovici-Jones, what motivated you to start a series of Writing Matters episodes on the history of writing and writing instruction?
So I decided to approach topics in the history of writing and writing instruction because we find ourselves in times when the rise of new technologies, especially AI, large language models, pose questions as to the nature and purpose of writing. Why do we write? Who do we write for?
Right.
What is the relationship between writing and our humanity? Topics in the history of writing and writing instruction don't necessarily answer these questions, but give us perspectives from which we can explore and reflect on these issues. So I mentioned both writing and writing instruction because writing is not something that comes natural to us. So what do I mean? As human beings, we are wired for speech. Okay, speech is natural. Babies learn how to speak by interacting with their caretakers. However, nobody's born a writer, right? Writer has to be learned, has to be taught. So learning about writing and its purpose and its connection to our humanity helps us reflect on aspects of who we are.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Could you tell us a little bit about the beginning of writing?
Sure. The beginnings of writing are complicated and messy. Generally because a lot of what is known about how writing emerged is based on archaeological records that are often incomplete. But scholars of writing generally agree that writing systems were probably developed independently in a number of different regions and times.
Oh, wow.
So the best known are four, like in Mesopotamia, writing probably emerged around 3400 to 3100 BC. Mesopotamia. Then we have ancient Egypt, probably around 3250 BC. In China, before 1250 BC, and in Mesoamerica before 1 AD.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would like to show you actually a couple of examples of ancient scripts.
Right.
Okay.
So if we could pull up the pictures, the first one is a cuneiform tablet. Okay, so a cuneiform tablet is a document, right, that is inscribed with a stylus, which is actually a writing implement that was made out of reed or bone or metal, on clay, okay, and the marks were made and then the piece was left to dry. So this shows the initial purpose of writing. Writing in Mesopotamia developed not for everyday use, but for administrative purposes. It was a way to keep records. Okay, and it's a way to sort of stabilize memory. So this particular example is a list of personnel. Okay, so this example shows us an example of writing cuneiform, and one of the initial purposes to stabilize memory and to keep records, administrative records. So the other example, if we can move to the next picture, is an Egyptian shapti. Shapti was actually a funerary object. The shapti was a symbolic servant that was supposed to actually accompany the deceased in the afterlife. So what you see there is the figure and an inscription. You see the inscription on the figure and also like blown up next to it. And the inscription reads, the illuminated one, the Osiris, the general of the army, Pakas, born of Epamis, drew a voice. So you see that in this particular case, hieroglyphic script serves a religious and sort of like magical purpose. Okay, so but overall, what I wanted to say that the history of writing and writing instruction reveals a number of really important connections. A connection between writing and memory, a connection between writing and technology, and also a connection between writing and power. So these are really important features of writing that we can explore through understanding aspects of the history of writing.
Yeah.
So following up with you speaking about how it started out, how do you think writing serves as an aid to the memory now?
Sure. So I would like to answer your questions with examples from ancient Greece. Okay, and then we're sort of try to see why this is relevant and in what way it could be relevant to us today. So ancient Greece was an oral culture, and so were pretty much all cultures of the time. So they were oral cultures. So knowledge was transmitted orally from elders to younger people, right? On a one-on-one basis. So, for example, from ancient Greece, we have a very famous poet named Homer, who produced, I would say, epic poems such as the Iliad and the Odyssey. So this, the name of Homer, we don't know if Homer actually existed as a person, but the name is probably for several generations of artists that produced, preserved, and transmitted these very, very long epic poems. So in this culture, the preservation of culture actually was done by a specialized class of people, which were called the rhapsodes. The rhapsodes learned for many years memory techniques. So they learned from a master, right? And they studied not using writing, but memory techniques, right? So they produced, so they could actually reproduce very, very long pieces of poetry, okay? So this was an oral culture, but then there was, at some point, there was a need for stabilizing this memory, right? Because, you know, it was person to person, right? So there was a need for stabilizing this memory. So sometime during the Bronze Age, which in ancient Greece lasted for about 2,000 years, from about 3,000 to 1,000 BC, writing emerged. It emerged as pictographs. Pictographs were symbols that were close to representing representations of things, right? Ideographs were symbols for ideas. And then we have syllabaries. Syllabaries are actual writing systems that represent clusters of consonants and vowels, right? Okay. So the best known syllabaries are what we call linear A and linear B. They come from ancient Greece, and they were very hard to learn. Okay, it's not like the writing you know today. They were very hard to learn, so people needed years to be able to master that. And again, writing wasn't used for everyday, you know, situations. It was mastered by a class of scribes. Okay. So they kept records, right? So they were responsible for official records. So this was what we call craft literacy. They specialized in this. Okay. So now around about 800 BC, we have a sort of revolution, but it's not like a revolution that happened like this. You know, we see it as revolution from far off, but we have a really, really important new development, the development of the alphabet. So the Greek alphabet probably was adapted from the Phoenician script, but it had letters, right? Letters that correspond to sounds of language. They had 24 letters, and the alphabet was initially used to stabilize the works of Homer. Right, so all those poems that were transmitted in oral form, they were written down. Okay, and what's really interesting about these epics was that they actually preserve many aspects of oral prowess. And for example, the epic poems, for example, they have long lists of genealogies or like ancestry, right? Long list of people. There were initially ways in which the rhapsodes, the poems, were able to show off their memory skills, right? So when they actually wrote it down, some of their techniques were still shown in writing, which is very, very interesting. So during the classical period, so what I would say is like still there was fairly specialized, writing still had fairly specialized purposes, but during the classical period, which started about 450 BC, writing became more widespread. I mean, the alphabet was easy to learn. Like you learned the alphabet when you were children, right? So kids back then today they started to read and write when they were children because the alphabet was easy. So the writing went from a specialized skill to non-elites. So pretty much everyone who had the means of studying had the opportunity and to do so. So the scholar Richard Enos suggests that the literacy revolution that occurred in Greece meant that writing was recognized as a system for enhancing complex patterns of thoughts and expression. So people recognized that writing wasn't just for stabilizing memory, but they were able to articulate, comprehend, and actually compose complex thoughts. So ironically, some of the most complex and most fascinating pieces of writing come from ancient philosophers. One of them was Plato. All right, so he was a masterful writer. He wrote in the forms of dialogues. And in one of his dialogues, the Phaedrus, he actually expressed misgivings about writing. He wrote it down, but he was like, he worried that writing, he used the voice of his teacher, Socrates, to suggest that writing actually, because we externalize our memory, right, led to memory loss.
Oh.
Right, so it's really interesting, and he wrote it down. All right. But what it's important for us to remember is that in ancient Greece, writing instruction usually occur like on a one-on-one basis with tutors, right, and in the household. What we know as a classroom today, like we gather together in groups with teachers, was actually a Roman invention. So the Romans came up with a system of public education where groups of students worked with the teacher or their master, right? So this system spread throughout the Roman world and actually survived. This is what we have today.
Yes.
Okay. What's really interesting is that in the Roman education system, writing was used extensively, but for the purpose of preparation for speech. For example, the rhetorician Quintilian, who lived in the 1st century AD, believed that in writing were the foundations of eloquence. So writing was not a goal in itself, but it prepared students for public speaking.
Right. That is so fascinating.
Actually.
So what technologies influenced the beginning of writing?
Sure. So first of all, I want to say that we speak of writing as a technology because it occurs outside the human body. It needs a tool, usually a surface, right, that is outside of us. As human beings, we have organs that are adapted for speech. So we have the larynx, we have the oral cavity, we have the nasal cavity. So all these organs are adapted for speech. So speech is natural. We produce sounds with our body, right? But we don't have writing organs, right? So we need some kind of implements, right? So that's why writing was born as a technology. And let me give you some examples of writing implements and writing surfaces. So the clay tablet that I showed you earlier was done with a stylus. And the stylus was a writing implement that was spread throughout the ancient world. It was basically a tool, like with a sharp point, right, that was able to make indentations in different surfaces. So we have, let's say, it was made in different materials, like reed, bone, metal, right? And it made indentations or scratches, right? Writing surfaces, for example, included the papyrus in ancient Egypt that was widespread, and also throughout the Mediterranean world. So what was the papyrus? The papyrus was a sheet, okay, that was made from the papyrus plant. So what people did was like they had the plant, they extracted the stem, and they kind of laid sheets of the stem, and they moistened and dried them. It was a complicated process, right? But they ended up with these sheets that then could be rolled up, okay, and the writing could be stored like that. We also have stone that was used as a surface, and usually the tool was a chisel, and the stone was used for inscriptions, usually like inscriptions, writing that was public, that that preserved public memory. We also, students in the classroom, those who were learning how to write, not necessarily in the classroom, either with the tutors or in the classroom, they used wax tablets. And what they were like wooden pieces, right? And they were covered with wax. And students used a stylus to kind of scratch in the wax. And then when they finished, they warmed up the wax with their hand until the wax melted, and they could start again.
That's really smart.
Yeah, so what's really interesting is that the technology itself sort of limits, or not necessarily limits, but gives shape to the writing itself. For example, the ancient Greek script was written in all caps for a very long time, okay? Cursives only appeared like in the Byzantine time, which is like 9th, 10th century AD. So it was a very long time. It was written in all caps because the way in which you can't write cursives when you scratch. It's very hard, right? So it was written in all caps, and what's really interesting, and it was written without any kind of spaces between words or any kind of punctuation. So yeah, I was like, what?
How do you write that?
Yeah, so everything was like one line of, and reading was again a craft because people, when they read, they understood from context where the word spaces were in, and they were able to insert the spaces and the modulations there in their voice. And what's also really interesting was that reading at the time was an oral activity. So when we read now, we just read silently, but it was really hard to read silently when you have those, long lines. So the reading was something that would happen orally. They was actually speak when they read the script. So what's really interesting to, also very important to remember is that writing required physical effort. When you think about it, when you have to chisel a stone, when you have to actually scratch the mark, so it required physical effort. And what really matters to us today is to think how writing was slower than thought. Thought was fast, right? You can think words
and speak.
Yeah, fast, but it took effort to write. So that's why ancient people saw writing as a way of forming complex ideas, because it required slowing down. It requires thinking. It forced deeper thought. Okay, so the question that I think we need to think about today is like, what happens when writing is faster than thought?
Right.
Think about if we use large language models or things like that. We can get large amounts of text that are produced by the LLMs before we even have a time to actually process that. So it's a question that's open for us, okay, open us for our reflection, but it's worth thinking about.
Right.
Okay.
So, as you just started saying so when society started becoming literate, what do you think the relationship was between writing and power?
So in the ancient world, as is the case today, so the ability to communicate was a source of power. So as I mentioned to you, in ancient Greece, the preservation of culture was in the hands of limited individuals, right? But a revolution occurred about around 507 BC, partly due to the rise of literacy, which was the invention of participatory democracy in Athens. Okay, so participatory democracy meant that citizens were actually having a direct voice in the affairs of the state.
Yes.
Well, what democracy at the time was not open to everyone. Citizens were males over 18. Okay, so women did not have a voice, but women did apparently were receiving some form of education.
Yes.
Not as much as boys though.
Right.
So citizens participated in the assembly and the council, and they directly influenced the affairs of the state. And that was a direct correlation to the rise of literacy. But remember that literacy serves as a purpose not in itself but for speech. So for people to participate in like showing up for the council, right, they had to be able to communicate. And they were very interested in learning how to communicate, because expressing ideas, persuading others was essential to the life of the city, the life of the community. So, so this is where we see the rise of on art, on a discipline we call rhetoric. Okay, and the in composition classes that you take today are an extension of the discipline of rhetoric that emerged then. And of teachers, okay, rhetoric teachers that are showing students how to communicate effectively in the public arena. And they use writing extensively as a preparation for speech. So, so what is really a point of consideration for us today is how can literacy support civic engagement and democracy today? What happens when we have people who
Can write.
who can't write or are no longer able to process complex thoughts? So it's very important for us to think about that and take to heart the fact that democracy and literacy really go hand in hand.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for the information you've shared with us. What should we expect further in the series?
Sure, I'm excited that we have some really interesting guests lined up. So what we can expect is a discussion of specific writing systems. We have a guest who will be talking about runes, a couple of guests who will be talking about systems of India. We also have discussions of how people learned how to write and what writing did for them. So we don't have a historical exploration or chronological exploration, but different topics that, again, help us value the connection between writing and our humanity.
I can't wait.
So thank you.
So thank you for watching. I'm Bailey Sanford.
And Nevaeh Tigert.
And to our guest, Dr. Gabriela Vlahovici-Jones, thank you for being here. And stay tuned for more episodes of Writing Matters that will be coming soon.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.